So parallel lines have a lot of awesome traits. I am given that these two lines are parallel. We have a transversal, let's go ahead and call it P, that is traveling through these two parallel lines. And we want to prove that alternate interior angles and corresponding angles are congruent. And so alternate interior angles are congruent to each other and corresponding angles are congruent to each other. To get started, a lot of times you just start with something that you know is true. Now, one of the postulates that hopefully you are already familiar with is that same side interior angles are supplementary. So we know that angles 3 and 5 here are supplementary to each other, meaning that angle 3 plus the measure of angle 5 must equal 180 degrees. And that's the same side interior angle postulate. In addition to that, so that's one statement. In addition to that, we also know, and I'm going to use angle 3 again, because then I've got that same angle in two different equations, which could prove useful. Angle 3 and angle 4 form a line or a straight angle, so I know that the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 4 must equal 180 degrees. I always forget the exact names, but to be honest, as long as you're justifying it with something that is valid, if you get the name a little wrong, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world. Well, now we can use substitution because we know that both of these things are equal to 180 degrees. Well, that means they both have to be equal to each other. Okay, and that's just through substitution. Using now the subtraction, the algebraic kind of subtraction property, I have measure of angle 3 on both sides. So if I subtract the measure of angle 3 from both sides, I'll get the same thing, right? And now we've proven that these two angles are congruent. Now, one of the things I'm pointing out here is that a proof you don't even have to necessarily know where you're going at first. It's generally helpful. But in this problem, I just made two statements that I know were true and hoped that when I kind of combined them together, it would tell me something interesting. Well, if we look at this, the measure of angle 5 and the measure of angle 4, well, let's look at what their relationship is. So the measure of angle 4 is right here. The measure of angle 5 is right here. And oh, you know what? Those are alternate interior angles. And if their measures are the same, then I know that angle 5 is congruent to angle 4. And we've just proved that alternate interior angles are congruent. Now, always keeping in mind, the condition was that the two lines that are intersected by the transversal must be parallel. But we've proved alternate interior angles are congruent to each other. So let's mark that on our diagram here. Great. So now we have that nice piece of information. Let's go ahead and see if we can prove those corresponding angles are congruent as well. Actually, that's going to be really easy because, again, let's just prove that things are congruent. But angle 5 here and angle 8, well, those are vertical angles. And we know that vertical angles, by the vertical angle theorem, are also congruent. So 4, we can just add in here that angle 5 is congruent to angle 8, and that is by the vertical angle theorem. And again, if you don't know the name of the theorem, look it up or just try to explain it in your own words. It's better to use the name if at all possible, but it's okay to do it the other way too. And now, since we know that angle 5 is congruent to angle 8 and angle 5 is also congruent to angle 4, we know that angle 8 must be congruent to angle 4, and that we can call substitution. And now we've proved that corresponding angles are also congruent. And so there's really two situations you're going to run into when you're given these parallel lines, and that's that you're going to have some supplementary angles and you're going to have congruent angles. And so far for supplementary, we have same side interior angles, and for congruent, we just showed that we have both alternate interior angles and we have corresponding angles. And just adding in some of those kind of truisms, they're not reliant on the parallel lines. We also know that vertical angles are congruent, and we know that linear pairs or straight angles are supplementary. And if you have these kind of 5 details down, you're going to have the most powerful tools that there are. The rest of them make things a little bit quicker, but with these, you can solve just about anything you need to solve.